Terrelja, who's the current founder and CEO of Acacia.ai, Matt Gleeson, who's VP of Global Alliances for Oracle Energy and Water, and Sharad Samani, who's Executive Director and Partner for ASPAC and the Head of Infrastructure for KPMG in Singapore. I thought what I might do just to set the scene, and I think what's critical in all of this is to understand the breadth of experience that sits before you. You may or may not have had a chance to be introduced to some of the panellists. So what I'll do first is just run through and give a short introduction to each of them. I'll do a broader introduction in relation to the topic, and then ask each of the panellists, in Sharad, Anu and Matt, just to talk a little about their perspectives. And then I've got a range of questions. Inevitably, as we go through that, what you will see and have your own questions as well. So we'll capture those as we go through it. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Anu Terrelja, as I said, as the founder and CEO of Acacia.ai. Anu's a highly credible entrepreneur with extensive experience in real estate and infrastructure. Her experience is across a mix of corporate engineering and professional services companies, and she established a startup, Oxford Caps, which is a student housing company, which she, as I said, not only founded, grew and successfully exited in 2021. She's an NCA graduate, and has been accoladed for the entrepreneurial journey she's been on with a variety of awards, which are too numerous to mention on this particular session. She's recently embarked on this new venture with Acacia.ai, which is focused on helping global real estate to move towards net zero goals and combat climate change. And when I asked her the one thing that you can't read on LinkedIn, you won't find on the internet, that drives her and she's passionate about, is travel. And I would ask anyone to defy someone who's got 50 plus stamps in their passport and is on their fifth passport. And when you ask her what her favourite city is, she would tell you it's Venice, which is fabulous. So welcome to the panel, Anu. I'd introduce Matt next. What you won't know about Matt and what you won't see here is he just stands at a smidge over 6'8" in imperial terms, and you might have a double take, because when I was doing the research on Matt, most of the things I saw were with him with a beard, and he tells me that he grows a beard once a year, so that must be the profile picture he puts out there when he speaks. But it's great to have him on the panel. Matt has 24 years of experience in the utility industry as a key advice to customers and partners in energy business transformation and innovation. And he is particularly focused on the deregulation that's occurred across global markets, have probably helped afford him a significant opportunity to work on things like grid performance, customer engagement, and almost everything in between. He has an absolute passion in helping utilities business improve that customer experience and optimising the performance, but also the acceleration of decarbonisation goals. And whilst he is a technologist at heart, having spent 16 years at Oracle, he's a believer in collaboration and the power of shaping human behaviour, and we'll get into a little of that today. And last but by no means least, we've got Sharad Samani, who, as I said, is Executive Director and Partner in KPMG Singapore and ASPAC's Head of Infrastructure. While he started his career as a power plant engineer and has shifted sort of into infrastructure and advisory work in the late 90s. I won't give exact dates, just so I don't want to age him too significantly. After working at Enron, he joined KPMG India before a short stint at PwC. He moved to Singapore in the mid-2000s and has been a key part of the KPMG infrastructure practice since 2005. He's currently, as I said, Head of Infrastructure for ASPAC and specialises in infrastructure project finance across the ENR sector. And his focus is now on digitalisation and decarbonisation and how we can help clients move towards net zero. If you want to know one thing about him, which you won't find in LinkedIn, it would be that he loves trekking, and in fact he's just walked the Annapurna circuit and climbed to 17,000 feet. So I suspect at this level we'll get a lot more out of him than we might have done at 17,000 feet. So welcome to all the panellists, and I appreciate you joining us today. As I said, before I pass to each of the panellists, I thought I'd just give you an overview of ASPAC as a region from an energy perspective. I'd like to characterise it probably in a couple of ways. One is to say, for those of you who aren't familiar with the geography of the area from a demographic perspective, the region contains over half the world's population when you centre yourself on Myanmar and draw a circle with a 2,500 kilometre radius. So it is a massive part of the world's population. And if you include India, it has more than half the world's energy consumption, and fossil fuels account for about 85% of ASPAC's current energy supply. It produces just under 60% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, and in spite of all that, has around 150 million people that do not have access to electricity on a daily basis, which in this day and age would seem a significant challenge. It's a region with a mix of developed and developing economies who need affordable and reliable energy supply for their economies to develop. And for the region to transition and become more sustainable, there will need to be significant investment in decarbonising the emissions, not only from the energy sector, but also from the large emissions from other sectors like transport and construction, which is why it's important that we have, the panel represented with strong infrastructure representation today. One of the potential accelerators for the transition that we talk about is the provision of sustainable energy solutions, and it should be technology and the innovative ways we use that should enable that. So I'm delighted to bring together a panel who you've just heard me discuss the role of technology in helping the region have affordable, reliable and ultimately sustainable energy. With that as an introduction, what I might like to do is ask the panellists to give a brief introduction. And Sharad, do you mind if I start with you, just asking you to sort of give your perspective on technology as it relates to ASPAC and the opportunities that exist?
Thank you, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for the kind introductions. It was very interesting to know the other side of each one of us. I think the technology discussion is quite pertinent. And as I was listening to all the sessions yesterday at Enrich, which is in its 13th year now, we talked a lot about affordability, sustainability, and security. And one thing became clear, that if we have to achieve our ambition of net zero by 2050, generally most countries have committed to that, and potentially still target a 1.5 degrees temperature increase, then policy, regulatory and financing mechanisms are kind of falling way short, isn't it? And COP26, unfortunately, didn't give as much impetus to our journey as we had expected. But what I firmly believe is technology is going to be that game changer that can still keep our hope alive for a potential 1.5 degree increase in temperature. Now, the reason I say that is threefold. In Asia Pacific, we are working with a number of utilities, multilaterals, as well as developers in broadly areas of generation side measures, demand side measures, as well as carbon abatement measures. And I'll just give briefly 3 examples of the kind of work we are doing, and hopefully we can deep dive into some of it together with Anu's and Matt's inputs. On the generation side, I think it's very critical, and you know that generally renewable energy, particularly solar, has reached grid parity in most countries. And Vietnam is a great example, which commissioned more than 15 gigawatts in the last 2-3 years, right? And it's so much so that now the grid is not able to handle so much of intermittent power. So clearly we need to look at the generation side of it. Green hydrogen has become a big agenda in Asia Pacific. In fact, Singapore announced 2 weeks back that close to 50% of our power generation needs will be made by green hydrogen by 2050. And that's a tall commitment and a good bet on green hydrogen as a low carbon green fuel. The second important aspect of the demand side measures is looking at the buildings and electric vehicles, right? Transport and real estate sectors, as you know, contribute a great deal of GHG emission together with the energy sector. And in this regard, I believe that the number of engagements that we're involved in, particularly electric vehicle charging stations, are proliferating across Asia Pacific. A number of countries have committed to phase out internal combustion vehicles and move towards electric vehicles in the 2040 to 50 timeframe. And that, I think, is going to be a great demand driver. In addition to that, I believe that what is happening in the real estate building sector in terms of optimizing green construction, having green buildings done is very powerful. In fact, Singapore has committed to have 80% of buildings to be green buildings by 2030. And that's, I'm sure Anu will have good insights on how to make it happen. But that clearly is a big opportunity for businesses as well as financing community to leverage technology in that space. And the third angle is the carbon abatement, to my mind, is going to be important. We are currently involved in an energy transition mechanism engagement in Southeast Asia, where we are retiring coal-fired power plants earlier than their expected economic life. And one of the things that has come up, which is quite critical, is the carbon capture and storage. While coal projects, of course, are base load, and we cannot decommission them in next 5 to 10 years, but we do not want them to be operating beyond 2030, 2040 as well, isn't it? And that's where the mechanism of not only catalyzing and fast tracking the retirement, but also incorporating carbon capture storage kind of technologies for carbon abatement will be important. And within that, the last point I wanted to make is technology for monitoring, reporting, and performance improvement has become mainstream now. The number of utilities we work in Vietnam, Indonesia are all looking at IoTs and AI-based reporting mechanisms for optimization of construction as well as operation. Predictive maintenance, for example, has become a norm, and improving productivity efficiency of power plants is a key thing happening all over the region. So those are the big three themes I wanted to put on the table. Thanks.
Thank you, Sharad, and we'll probably come back to a couple of those just as we step through this and ask the key questions. Anu, could I pass to you just to get your perspective? Obviously, what you bring to the table is, and this is what I like about this panel, there are three very, very different views, and with your entrepreneurial background, perhaps it'd be good to get your sense of the role of technology in changing that ASPAC energy landscape.
Sure. Thanks, Jonathan. So there are two key aspects that Sharad briefly touched upon that are the areas that we are primarily working in at Acacia. So as Sharad mentioned, real estate or construction activity are a big consumption center for energy. And for any change to kind of come into the whole energy debate, real estate at a fundamental level has to change. So Sharad mentioned about changing buildings to green buildings, which is an important initiative that's going on globally. But we also need to understand that 80% of energy consumed today is actually in existing buildings or in building operations, which requires massive investment at the real estate level to change building level MEPs and systems to be able to adopt these renewable technologies that are coming up, right? And that I feel is not only the biggest challenge that we have, but it's also the largest opportunity that's present in the real estate sector today. That's the key area where we are working on, in addition to what he mentioned about reporting and monitoring. So just globally, I'll touch upon this later in detail, but globally now regulators are coming up with a mandate for listed companies or larger enterprises to measure their emissions more accurately, specifically when it comes to scope 3 emissions, right? For any business, majority of their emissions lie within scope 3, the value chain. And that is something which businesses have always struggled to capture accurately. And that's, I think, the area where technology would be really, really useful because you have to really go down into the supply chain, understand each and every part of the supply chain to be able to accurately assess the scope 3 emissions, which is where a lot of modern day platforms are being deployed. We are working in a similar domain, but focused on real estate sector. Real estate also, apart from just energy consumption, has its nuances, specifically when you go towards asset classes like hospitality, data centers, right? There's massive scope 3 generation that you're talking about. And unless the emissions are not accurately allocated to the right stakeholders, you cannot expect change to happen, because the one who's responsible for it is the one to correct it, right? And that's the basic principle. So I feel technology is going to be at the forefront of all change, meaningful change that happens within the climate domain and energy transition domain, not only from the perspective of just helping companies scale up their systems and processes to be ready for this new world order, but also to be able to accurately understand, where the deficiencies are and get into, specific asset level, like preventive maintenance and, asset level deficiencies that exist today.
Thank you, Anu, and that's exactly as I'd hoped it would be, another perspective in relation to this. And we'll come back, as I think, to get some use cases or case studies from you a little later in relation to how some of those are being done or how you see potential to be done. Matt, it'd be good to get your perspective, if you don't mind, just to share an opening perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I'm sure for everybody in the room listening to us today, it's been a topic of over every cup of tea and every cup of coffee. It's been a topic that all four of us have spoken about in length, and Sharad touched on it earlier. In COP27 and its outcomes, it Enricher's been in a beautiful spot that we've been able to comment on the outcomes of each of the several last COPs pretty soon afterwards. And I think there's something that Sharad said which really resonates with me, which is we look now on the outcomes of those summits with a degree more, I don't want to say pessimism, I think it's pragmatism. We look at it and we go, can 2 weeks in a room by world leaders change this? And I think we're all starting to realise in the early days we thought it could. Now I think we realise it's not quite going to be that way. Commitments made, handshakes done, all of those then go back to state-based entities trying to drive change, and that's a really variable concept. So yes, I do think technology has a massive, massive role to play in doing that. And what's brilliant is organisations like ANUS and many of the startups that KPMG did so well to profile, and in many of the large enterprises, such as the one I work for and others, are putting a lot of innovation into where that decarbonisation solutions can come from. Here's, even as a technologist, I have a fear. And the fear I have is that what we're looking for is a magic button. And Jonathan and I spoke about it yesterday, is this danger that what we think is, what we'll do is we'll tidy up around the edges and wait for the big kicker to come in. And I just don't see that it's going to be that way. I think the collaboration, and it's possibly we've schooled ourselves to think that way. When we think about all the improvements that technology's seen over such a long time, we've always seen, Moore's law and the accelerated, improvements we see in technology, but they're variations on a theme. Now, this is not a theme that we've mastered in the first case. So we are inventing to try and really catch up. And that's a difficult spot to be in. But it is a spot that we can come at. And what I think, while I worry about the concept of people thinking we're waiting for the breakthrough revolution, be that battery storage or be that, clean hydrogen at scale or whatever it might be, I think the truth of it is what we're doing at the moment is a lot of harnessing of information, but not necessarily using it the best way we can. I think utilities of today, and not just utilities, but many, many companies that work in and around the industry, are sitting on top of this enormous pile, almost as big as that being climbed in the background of Jonathan there, of data that they just don't know how to process and use. And that's where that concept, that machine learning and that artificial intelligence needs to be the next frontier that we really apply and link it almost as the central answer. IoT is a brilliant opportunity for us, but that's capture. The next part of it is what do we do with it? And that's where we're going to try and develop, with good information and good data processing, there's 3 outcomes we can hope to do. We can shape policy, and what we need to be able to do is highlight where we believe the biggest savings in the most effective way that suits the population, suits the climate, and suits the transition pace that we can sustain. Those can go into policy decisions. Secondly, it can shape the policies and the processes we have inside our own utilities today. So how do we improve our process of coming to market with energy, whether that's upstream in the generation facility, whether it's downstream, whether it's in control of the relationship with the customer? What is that process that can better improve there? But the final one is really, what can it do to shape people? And by understanding better the information about the way we use energy, perhaps that is our real opportunity. To Anu's point, how can we then bring it to the backyard, effectively, of who it matters the most to, and actually engage them in wanting to be a part of the climate solution? The fear, again, if we think that people are going to hold back waiting for technology to answer it, I just don't want to wait that long. I don't want to be here in 4 years saying we haven't quite broken through there. Let's use what we have today.
That's a compelling start, like the others, and maybe what I do as a start point to that, Sharad, is to get your reaction, in part to where Matt's led us, which is technology is part of the answer, but there are elements of it we need to get right. There is probably, and mixed in all of that, Matt, is some behavioural change that needs to occur, in developed economies and probably in developing economies. So, Sharad, could I just get your reaction to what Matt's put out there as a start point?
Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks, Jonathan. And I think what Anu said and what Matt said totally resonates. And I sometimes feel that we put a lot of focus on this big technology breakthrough, disrupting the entire ecosystem, and saving the world. I would want to split my response into two parts. The first part is there are a lot of low-hanging fruits which still we have not addressed, right? And then we should look at the medium and long term on how technology can help us go to that. So what are the low-hanging fruits? And there are some examples I wanted to share. So if you look at energy efficiency, and we discussed in day one yesterday about that, energy efficiency probably is not as well focused on as we should, because it's not that glamorous to talk about energy efficiency, I guess, across sectors, right? The industrial segment, the real estate that we talked about. We believe that there are huge potential for demand side management initiatives, which can actually optimize our involvement in the whole lot of ecosystem of optimizing energy. The focus till date has been more on construction, installing new capacity. I think I see, particularly with our clients in Asia, there's a fair bit of focus on demand side measures, smart meters, demand response to energy grid requirements, and particular focus on energy efficiency, which leads to more of reporting or monitoring, reporting, and verification kind of measures. There is Energy Conservation Act, which was passed in Singapore a couple of years back, which essentially entails all major consumers to not only measure their energy consumption, but also give a trajectory of how they will optimize and make it more efficient in the next 5 years. And that I thought is an important low-hanging fruit, which most countries can do. The second one I wanted to focus on within that low-hanging fruit is data for better management, right? Now data is very easily available, as highlighted. And it's very cheap as well to get the IoT data. What is not possible is probably the digital transformation of the utility. And we worked in Vietnam utility as well. And we realized that there's an abundance of data, but how to make data intelligent for decision making is something we need to work on. This again is not going to be very expensive, but we need to kind of focus on using that data for better decision making going forward. And the third low-hanging fruit is, you won't believe, there are a number of still off-grid solutions, particularly in remote parts of Indonesia, Philippines, and Pacifics, where they're still running on diesel power at 30 cents per kilowatt hour. And we ran a program recently with PLN in Indonesia to convert their entire fleet of diesel plants into solar-powered solutions in a hybrid fashion. So at least you get substantial part of your power coming through solar solutions and potentially some battery, which can still be cheaper than 30 cents. And that is something which we should do, isn't it? We should get away from dirty fuel as soon as possible. So that would be my suggestion for the short term, and that we are quite engaged on. On the medium to long term, we do expect that electrolyzer technologies will become more efficient. We can store and transport hydrogen much more efficiently, because we believe hydrogen will be an important part of the solution. We also believe that regional grids will be important, because if you look at Southeast Asia as an example, there's a lot of hydro potential in East Malaysia, in Laos, Cambodia, and there's huge demand in countries like Malaysia, Singapore. So a grid strengthening project interconnect will be important. So some of those measures will start giving us the solution in medium to long term.
Yeah, I think that's very important. And there's obviously a lot of activity occurring, which, Matt, I think you talked to. And one of the things I knew you picked up on quite early is how do you think about the regulatory environment, and how do you think about the policy environment that might stimulate some of this? So I think with all of this potential sitting out there for us to access this data and use it in a way that helps inform or give us insight on how we might apply it efficiently, you alluded in your conversation or in your introduction to the role of reporting and monitoring, and I think in part into the role of the regulatory environment in helping to affect this. Do you want to give us some perspectives on that?
Sure. So, see, end of the day, businesses, with all good conscience, I feel mostly move, you can meaningfully move the needle on two parameters. Either there's a regulatory push or there's an impact on the bottom line, right? And we are in an interesting time where both is happening, right? And especially when it comes to real estate sector, one is sort of impacting the other. Now, what that means is that the regulation. So, for example, in US, there is an impending SEC regulation which talks about listed companies to report on their climate risk. Now, this regulation, when it's far-reaching for listed companies, real estate being a fundamental infrastructure sector, it has an indirect impact on the real estate sector as well. So, with all companies wanting to set up net zero targets, want to get closer to net zero, the first port of call is, okay, let's move to net zero buildings, because that's where most of your direct emissions are coming from. And that indirectly has caused such a massive impact on real estate sector that whatever the ROI on adopting renewable energy in the buildings used to be, back in the day, used to be 8 to 10 years, has now shortened to 3 to 5 years. So this is coming both from the rising cost of energy as well as on the revenue side. With more tenants being interested in net zero buildings, you can expect like a 7 to 10% higher rentals on net zero office buildings, and you're seeing this shift globally. So regulations, sometimes not just directly, but indirectly also have a massive impact. And I think that push, it's really interesting to see that push not only coming from developed countries, but even developing countries like India. Even in India, SEBI, which is the SEC equivalent, has mandated the top 1,000 listed companies to start reporting on their, climate risk as part of the business social responsibility reporting. So as and when this regulatory push sort of comes in, maybe with some more punitive measures as well, as we've seen carbon tax or remediation fee in different countries, it will become more and more effective and will force businesses to really take action.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I suppose if you link that back to where Matt sort of started this, which was the challenge around something like a COP environment, the COP27 environment, where there's a lot of intent, how you ground that intent in action in country relies on a range of actors. And obviously the government is one actor. The other actors obviously relate to companies and the community and also ultimately probably employees. Matt, you and I had a long conversation, and I know this is a technology-based discussion, but around behaviour and how you shape that behaviour. So one lever to pull is the I guess if I could use it politely, is the stick, which is the regulatory lens and the requirement. How do you get that collaboration to basically help settle on a technology and approach, Matt, that might effectively make a difference and get that commitment across a range of countries, particularly in ASPAC, given there's such a disparity between developed and developing economies in the region?
Yeah, I think that's the interesting part of this is developed economy, dirty fuel sources or not. The one thing that'll be consistent is if we can grow amongst the population of this planet a desire to see the importance of this to be greater than the convenience of energy at all hours. And I'm not advocating for everybody only having a small amount of energy in their lives. I'm advocating for us pushing at all levels for this. And that, I think, is the behavioural change we need to see. We've done it as a global community in the past. We did it with CHCs. You recall back in the 80s when there was an outcry there around the ozone, and it didn't matter which country you were in, everybody made the pledge to do this. And I think that's where we are, but it's a bit more complex than a bit of deodorant, or, that's the challenge, I suppose. But so one of the things, yes, technology panel, and I don't want to take away from the central theme on it, but even as a technology company, we spend an incredible amount of our energy and our R&D investment on behavioural science, because it's what you can then make all the intelligence of the processes, procedures, data, insights, and all of those. they're all wonderful. But if they don't create an action or a reaction, they're all for naught. So trying to find a way to loop into those motivators that sit within everybody, and I'm talking big business down to individual consumers, no matter which country they sit in, anywhere in the world, finding a motivation there to want to have a climate-sensitive approach to energy is critically important. And we look at everything in that. You need to look at everything. You need to look at everything up the supply chain and down, because there's one thing to say, well, the device I have is exceptionally energy efficient, but if the source of my energy is not, then where am I? It's the same. And speaking about these 6-star energy rating buildings, as an outcome, excellent. What's it take to build them? What's the carbon footprint to get that there, to do it, the investment involved? And we've got this real life scenario today, which is unfortunate, but there's this skepticism that's formed over the electric vehicle revolution, which is, well, how is that going to help? It's still dirty coal fueling the car anyway. We've got to try and get the population to understand how to move the needle. And once they understand it, they then put that imperative on their own families, on their own usage, on the companies that they buy from, on the investments that they make, on the way that they vote. All of these things come into effect. And without wanting to be too controversial, it will take, I think, this idea of the Arab Spring almost. It comes from an uprising of the people. We need that to be embedded in order to make this change really happen. So, again, I apologise if I've stepped over the line with that reference, but it's the concept of empowerment down at that internationally consistent level, which is the population. If we can drive them to see what's possible, we can drive everything else. And technology, of course, will be there to pick up when they want to act. And that's going to be the most important thing.
Yeah, I think it makes eminent sense, and I think part of what we need in this debate is to be challenging of ourselves. And part of what I'm reminded of is a piece of work KPMG recently did around human capital, particularly in businesses. And what we ultimately concluded was a variety of things, but my sense would be that the greatest judge of a company's legitimate transitional pathway to net zero will be your employees, because they're the ones who will not only see what you've stated publicly, but what you can physically achieve, what you're physically achieving. I suppose, Sharad and Anu, as you start to think about the sort of the opportunity, and I sort of alluded to it at the start, where if I'm sitting in a developing economy, I'm very much focused on affordable and secure energy. And then I'd focus on sustainable energy. How do we use technology to try and make sure that energy supply is affordable, it is secure, and therefore by virtue of that and it can be sustainable at the same time? And what role does technology have in that? Sharad, would you have a view on that?
Yeah. So Jonathan, I think, and this is a very important point on the people driving the agenda, and we do believe people and employees have an important stake. But when we talk about energy trilemma, we put it as security, sustainability, and affordability, right? My sense is security and affordability come in order of priority, and then sustainability when you ask people to put the money on the table, right? And this is where I think technology will have an important role to play. I think the biggest elephant in the room is people will not become sustainable unless it's commercially, financially attractive as well. And we speak to a number of funds who go and say that we are ESG focused. And when you look at return expectations, it don't necessarily change substantially, right? So what we need to think through is how can technology enable a parity with traditional sources of energy. If you look at why Vietnam could commission 15 gigawatt in 2 years, is primarily because there was a grid parity in terms of solar power becoming same tariff as traditional power. My sense is the tipping point will happen, or the Arab revolution will only happen when you have technology leveling the cost in such a fashion that it's a no-brainer, right? And this is where my belief is, it's not the policy or the financing institutions which are going to drive the energy transition agenda. It's going to be technology which will drive the agenda. The good news is there's a lot of investment happening across all the technology solutions that we talked about, whether it's CCUS, whether, green hydrogen electrolyzers, SMR technologies being tried, waste to energy, number of technologies that we're working on are becoming mainstream. Our sense is next 3 to 5 years are very, very important, and technology breakthroughs will happen in some of this, including energy efficiency in both industrial as well as real estate sector, that will make some of these solutions mainstream, and people will embrace it, knowing fully well that while they are environmentally conscious, they also don't have to fork out a huge premium to be sustainable. And that's going to be the driver for change.
Yep. Yeah, agreed. Anu, did you want to comment on that as well?
Yeah, just very quickly, just to add to what Sharad mentioned, if you look at the trilogy of it, I think there's a fourth piece, which is scalability. And scalability is what eventually gets you, affordable and sustainable sources of energy. And I think that's where technology is kind of really going to play a big role in just developing scalable systems that can be adopted. And unless systems are scaled up, we've looked at solar for a long time, and unless you're able to scale that up, it really cannot be affordable as well as efficient and secure. And I think technology would really play a pivotal role in helping with scalable systems.
Yeah, I suppose the piece we've all talked about is the investment as well. We've sort of talked about significant investment going in, that investment coming in the form of government investment, corporate investment, and then obviously how you get a return on that. And obviously I can see investors reshaping their timeframes, particularly on traditional hydrocarbon-based projects, for what they're willing to accept. In Australia, for instance, we're looking at a potential gas pipeline, and the return on investment for that pipeline would have been judged over the asset would have been 25 years, and it's now back at 15. So I think there's pressure coming on from the investment community to say, we want to look at alternatives. Yeah, I suppose my question would be the sharing of that investment, particularly so who invests in the technology, to what extent does government stimulate that, and to what extent does corporate sort of place some big bets to effectively, to your point, I suppose, earlier, Matt, to effectively guide that. And one piece you and I talked about yesterday, Matt, is the role of partnerships and all that. So rather than having individual entities going out and doing that, how do you partner effectively? How do you incentivise the small, agile, entrepreneurial business like yours, Anu, to participate, as opposed to Matt solely sitting on the shoulders of your organisation? So, Matt, would you have a comment around how we bring that to life?
Yeah, I do. And I just, before I sort of delve into it, I think the comment that Sharad made there about the parity of cost is so critical in this. And I just, look, I can't bypass it without adding that anybody I know, including myself, the moment I had solar panels, the second thing I did was go and put an order in for 24-hour sunlight. And unfortunately, I couldn't get it delivered. But that's going to be the thing that we've got one half the answer. We've got the daylight answer. We need the nighttime answer. And that's it's not that far away. And I think that's what's really going to help our parity. Daylight hours parity, I have no concerns with. We can find that, and the scale is there for that, to Anu's point. It's going to be when those peaks happen, which unfortunately isn't at midday. But look, to go to the partnerships, I think the really important thing is companies that are in this space that need to make decisions on how they're going to move themselves forward, how they're going to actually change and provide returns on what investments they make around decarbonisation, or just what investments they make and what their ESG conscience drives them to do. They do want to be able to choose agile players. They want to be able to choose the new technologies and have them trialled and put into action, even in situations where it may be, a short-term period to evaluate. I'm all for that. I advocate for that strongly. I think there is a time when there's some corporate systems which that you're going to make investment in over a long time. You take a long time. You make decisions on those things very carefully and consciously of what that's going to do. And again, I'll advocate for that as well. What can help in this situation? Well, if you're going to have a lot of data, and you're going to have a lot of different, scenarios that you're going to be testing out. The most important thing is to be able to orchestrate across the top of it. So whether it is multiple systems feeding up information, the truth of it is we are finding out more and more every day by bringing together information from solutions that didn't historically speak in the past. It's only 2 years ago that at this very conference, we were having that discussion about the convergence of IT and OT. And, I think now we still talk about it, but we talk about it as it has happened. And now if it hasn't happened, there's a massive opportunity there that is, unharvested. And I think there's enough people in this market that know that merging of information is the critical outcome here. So I'm all for, and I would advocate for finding the right solutions, trialing solutions, being bold and actually being adventurous in trying to get out and find those companies to work with that are shining a new light on the journeys forward. And look at an underpinning of how to use that information across an enterprise and even outside that enterprise so that it can be shared with those most important stakeholders, the people that we end up serving at the end of everything we do, which is those companies and those consumers that need the energy at the end of the day.
Matt, have you got examples, without breaching any commercial confidentiality, of sort of partnerships that you've entered into where you've sort of been able to test some of this out? Have you got some examples? I know that's your role globally in regions.
Yeah, so Jonathan, if I look at the mix and the mash of what comes together here, the biggest data source that has sprung itself upon utilities in the last little while is undoubtedly metadata. It's a 1,500 times load of data that they traditionally hadn't dealt with to that level, but it's a degree more insights. Now, we did that very one-dimensionally in the first case. We thought about it as a means of better revenue control. That was almost the driver behind AMI internationally. Yep. Wave 2 came and looked at it slightly differently and said, how many more different ways could we use this? And then we started to put new sensors into new locations. Then we started to think about it in amalgam with our outage control systems. Then we started to think about demand response and the like, and periods of day that we could look at that. So my illustration here is that as you start to think about using information in different ways, those partnerships start to become more obvious to you. So from our own perspective, we deal with a large number of sensor equipment manufacturers, to meter manufacturers, to grid control systems, to anything there that is a fundamental source of information, to organisations that technology is behind the scenes for us. I'm talking about weather bureaus. I'm talking about climate forecasting, talking about tidal information, those kinds of things. They all make a big increment on the insights that you can have in your data sources when you get there. And not to leave anything behind on this. These are all data sources. At the end of the day, it's the engagers of how do you transition the business? I mean, we can't deny it. Internationally, the utilities business has a lot of ingrained procedural mindset, and we are all working to try and find new ways to innovate through that. So it's people that can talk the talk with people that also help so much in this as well. So that's a big landscape. I apologise, it's possibly not as finite as
No. I will ground that. And I'll give one example before I come to you, Sharad. I was talking to a VP of a gas and power trading business in Europe, and he said we know more about the weather in regions by virtue of the performance of our solar farms than the Bureau of Meteorology does. I can tell you more about what's going on in a particular region by virtue of the production of the wind, of our wind assets, than the Bureau of Meteorology can. I guess the question in all of that, of course, is how much of that data is proprietary, and how much of that can I share to help inform a broader community about the choices we might make to help accelerate this. And that goes to a key word, I think, when you talk about COP27, that strikes me as collaboration, and how you distinguish between the commercial elements of collaboration, which obviously I want to derive a return on investment from, and those that are non-commercial that I can share, and the insights will help advance what we're going to be doing, particularly in regions like ASPAC, which can learn a lot potentially from some of the advances being made in other regions. And Sharad, I was going to ask you for maybe a perspective on that. Do we have to have governments regulate that, or is that something we think we can get better access from companies that recognise that collaborating, working together around technology solutions might make it easier for us to advance much more quickly?
No, I think so. We can't keep government out of this, right? And the way I see it is a four-party equation that will solve this puzzle, right? So, of course, policies or regulatory frameworks are very, very important. I think looking at financing, we talked about financial institutions playing their part, and they will continue to be an important part of the equation. Private sectors, technology companies will have to play their part. But the other part, which we should not forget, is multilaterals, bilaterals, and foundations as well. And increasingly, I see they playing a very, very important role in driving some of these agendas, right? Recently, we worked with World Bank and Japanese institutional investors on developing clean, green hydrogen applications across sectors in emerging markets. And some of these pilots are very important to drive the change agenda. And this is what I think we should look at. One quick example, not from the energy sector, but I wanted to share is we did a digitalization of land registry in Fiji, which was funded by Asian Development Bank. It started as a small smart city engagement, but converted the entire paper-based records, which is the case in most cities, into digital records, and everything is online now, including approvals and clearances. It brought a huge amount of efficiency into the system. And with the use of blockchain technology, you can ensure that everything is, monitored and recorded properly. And this cut down the process of buying land in Fiji from 18 months to 6 months. So the kind of efficiency, productive gain that were developed is quite amazing. But the important message, I guess, here is there are IT and OT solutions for different industries that are available. I don't think we have to reinvent the wheel. We can replicate some of the simple solutions across geographies. And this is where multilaterals can play a very important role in taking the best practices from one country or one sector to other sectors in other countries. And this will drive and fast track our transition.
I was going to say, I suspect that one of the key things in the roles, without wanting to plug KPMG per se, Sharad, is the role of firms like ours in helping to sort of share perspectives from different sectors. I would argue that many companies sitting in their own sector possibly don't look at a horizon beyond that sector, whereas we'll be looking at business models in financial services or in telecommunications and how they might relate to an energy solution for an EV company, for instance. So I think, you sort of talk not only about collaboration, but the role organisations like ours play in helping to take that idea, that thinking, and transition it across into other sectors, and that will hopefully accelerate. Are you seeing those, given that you work in such a broad remit across infrastructure and utilities more broadly, are you seeing the potential for that? And I'm not just talking about KPMG, obviously, but roles for companies like ours, like MATS, who don't sit in one sector?
Yeah, it's in fact, we have a strong program of alliances within KPMG where we work with organizations like Oracle. In fact, we work quite extensively, a lot of startups. As you know, Enrich had day one of innovators, and we launched a few companies and supported them as well. So I think the entire ecosystem has to work together to solve this once in a lifetime opportunity to solve the problem, right? And we have to all come together.
Anu, you, of all of us sitting in the room, you probably have the greatest agility, with all due respect to my KPMG peers and Oracle. Your ability to affect change quickly, to see the opportunities. What sorts of things do you need? You talked about reducing the footprint of buildings. What sorts of things do you need to affect that more quickly? What are the things from a technology perspective you need to make that happen beyond regulation?
I think more than technology, what's been the challenge for most sustainability or climate-driven companies for the past decade is access to capital. And I think that's been a problem that has we've come of age on that, right? Even in the venture world, you would see a lot of venture capital funds, the larger ones. They are now coming up with a climate-specific fund, which have like they understand that this is going to be a little more long-term game as opposed to your pure technology ventures, right? And they are launching funds with the life to be able to support this long-term cause. And these are mainstream funds, the likes of Sequoia, A16Z, Axel that I'm referring to, right? So when you see that happening, that's where I think a major change in technology, that really creates a ground for major change in technology innovation, because founders like myself or several others of us who would have wanted to explore the space and create innovative technologies and systems, they didn't have the right platform with the right capital available. Government can only do so much. There are lots of government grants that are available, but they're really limited in their capacity, right? So you need mainstream capital to sort of back it, not only from the perspective of starting up, but also in from the perspective of, especially in climate space, a lot of founders are technical background. They're highly technical background. They don't come with a business sort of mindset. So how do you really build a scalable business venture out of a innovative technology, right? And that's something when mainstream capital and good institutional capital sort of starts backing these companies, that really helps create that ecosystem. So that's really wonderful to see that that's happening at a rapid pace. Other than that, I think what we are realizing, like even in our case, we are of course in conversation with KPMG, but even other consultants in real estate space, your JLL Cushmans of the world, but at the same time, companies like IFC, right? So we are working closely with IFC and the ADB also to kind of look at their real estate and infrastructure level emissions, and also for their portfolio companies. So as companies are kind of coming at forefront with this sort of challenge, I've seen that there is a lot more sort of willingness to work with new and innovative companies as opposed to any other sectors. And I think that along with how the capital has opened up is really where we are at a fantastic point to leverage technology and innovative solutions to make this shift.
Yeah, I think that's I think I agree with all that, and I think it's sort of and to Sharad's point earlier, bringing all of those dimensions together is something that needs to happen. I suppose the question I'd ask you, if we were sitting as we will be in Enrich in 2023, what's the one change or the one thing you would like to have seen happen between the last 12 months? And Matt, I suspect your vision and ambition for what's happened in the last 12 months might be very grand, but in terms of what we should aspire to be, what's the one thing you think from a technology perspective you'd like to see that's we've advanced significantly in between where we sit today and when we're sitting down for Enrich in 12 months' time?
Well, it's only a short period to Christmas. If I had my Christmas wish here, I think it's the one thing I'd love for us to do, no matter whether it's developed economy or developing economy, is that the kilowatt hour that emits the least carbon is the one we don't use. Let's find ways not to produce more energy than we actually need, because if we have those answers, which in the daylight hours with our solar, and we have that, and we're building systems for peak load at other times, let's find the smartest possible way to do that. And that's not just about the generation capacity, it's also about the loss capacity. And I think, I tip my hat to the REC and the MOP inside India for putting such a heavy focus on what's happening in the RDSS program, really trying to tackle some of those AT&C losses. It's going to be, it's a critical foundation for this. If we can avoid, and it doesn't matter which part of the world you're in, if we can avoid building that next power plant that emits carbon, it's an overall saving, because those things cost a lot of money. They take a lot of carbon to build, as well as a lot of carbon is produced once they're running. So I think that would be my 12-month ambition. What can we do to really phase out producing energy when we could avoid it? Then what we can do is go for a second phase of making the energy that we do need carbon neutral. That would be the next step.
I asked an unfair question of a VP in trading recently, and I said, if we could get Europe to shape its energy demand to run their run their heating at 20 degrees rather than 24 and shape their driving habits, would there be enough energy in your mind to go round? And he said, absolutely. You wouldn't be having outages in Pakistan. You wouldn't be having power, gas shortfalls in places like Myanmar. There is enough to go around. It's just going back to your original point, reshaping behaviours. So while we're talking about an ASPAC lens, it's so dependent on how other parts of the world respond. And going right back to where I think we started, collaboration is critical. Sharad, maybe the question for you then, sitting down in 12 months' time with your view of what's the one thing from a technology perspective in the region that's changed the most or should have changed the most?
Yeah, I think I was just thinking as Matt was highlighting his wish. I was wanting to kind of draw parallels with going for a trek, if I may, Jonathan.
Sure.
We are probably at the base camp, right? And when you are at the base camp and we know what the summit is, in this case, our 1.5 degree target, let's say our net zero target by 2050 or 2060, we know the summit, we know the base camp. What is required for a successful summit is collaboration, preparation, and a clear roadmap, right? Collaboration, I think we have to drive that. The time for talk is over. I think we have to act, share best practices, live off each other's strengths, right? And this is where the four parties that I talked about should come together and start actioning those pilot projects or research projects or working with startups, right? The roadmap has to be very clear. We don't want to boil the ocean on day one, right? We have a journey together, right? I think we get very afraid that, hey, we are not going to control and what can we do? My sense is next 3 to 5 years, we have to work on those low-hanging fruits. And technology is available to address some of the low-hanging fruits that we discussed today. Yeah. And finally, I think it's leveraging all the tools that we have got, right? We have got IT, OT tools, as we discussed. We have got technology companies. We've got the financing tools available. I think applying those tools one step at a time will help us submit very soon.
Thank you, Sharad. That's well said. Anu, your perspective?
So in the short term, I think I'm very excited about a lot of technologies that are currently under work, especially in the carbon capture space. And when it comes to buildings, specifically on optimization, I recently spoke to somebody who in the US, he's founded a company that develops insulation materials for buildings, right? And that kind of reduces your energy consumption by 30%, just naturally, right? So there's a lot of innovation that's happening in building materials. Cement specifically, there is massive innovation. That's one of the largest contributors to the embodied energy and embodied carbon. And there's a lot of innovation that's happening around making cement more net zero, closer to net zero. And I think those are some of the technologies that I'm really excited about in the short term. But as somebody said, that as human beings, we always overestimate what we can achieve in a year and underestimate what we can achieve in a decade. So I wouldn't, kind of hold my breath for next 1 year. But from a decade perspective, I definitely feel that as an entrepreneur, I'm a fundamental optimist. So I definitely feel that all the technology innovation that has happened till now has led us to solving for this problem, because this is a problem that we cannot not afford to solve. So I think over a decade, we would be able to kind of achieve the targets that we've set out for ourselves. And all these different technologies and all of us hopefully will play an important role in that.
Yeah, I think they're very, very sage comments. And I think what I love about ambition is it creates pressure. It creates pressure to innovate. It creates pressure to act. And that's what I love about what's happening in the world at the moment. I know in the discussion this afternoon, we probably haven't gotten down into the deep depths of every element of technology. But I think technology, if it's genuinely, to your point, Matt, an enabler, there are a range of other things, particularly around those four particular actors that you you talk about, Sharad, that are critical in effectively getting them to work together. Technology, if it's used right, and I think there are some great examples this afternoon of where technology is being used, and I think the more investment that gets poured in, the greater the chances that these technologies, the cost to your point, Matt, will come down. And the aspiration and the ability of organisations like yours to take advantage of those opportunities and develop agile approaches to solutions is critical as well. So can I collectively thank you for your conversation this afternoon? It's gone in a variety of directions, but ultimately I think, we've covered off on a few key elements of this. Yes, it is. Yes, technology is critical, but there are a range of other things that we need to get right. And part of that, I think, and you said this in your opening comment, Sharad, is around demand management. I absolutely believe that. Let's not produce an electron, Matt. We don't have to. And then necessarily, let's make this effectively, affordable, sustainable, and secure. And then we have a planet that the future generations can enjoy in the way that they need to. So, on behalf of KPMG, can I thank you all for your contribution this afternoon? And I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.